Speaking of constantly, it's live. It always has to be on. In terms of live in play and real-time betting versus casino or any other betting things, what's the market penetration?
We always look at the user experience as the main thing as well, because you don't want to frustrate your punters.
Real-time betting, live in play. Can you just maybe explain to the audience what do we mean when we say all that?
Yeah, sure. So let's talk about sports betting in general.
Hello and welcome back to the Coding Culture Podcast, the podcast all about technology, innovation, and all the cutting-edge practices that shape our digital landscape. Today, we're going to have a very interesting topic for you. We're going to be talking about real-time betting. I am joined by some very special guests. I'm joined by Zahid, a colleague of mine, a software delivery lead from Bet Software with a vast experience in the creation of software, in testing, and everything in the life cycle. We're also joined by Rodney, a senior software engineer. I think he'll be taking us through all the technical nitty-gritties that we need to talk about with the podcast. Welcome to the pod.
Here we go.
Thank you so
Thank you so much.
Okay, so I think I already said a term there, like real-time betting, live in play. Can you just maybe explain to the audience what do we mean when we say all that?
Yeah, sure. So let's talk about sports betting in general. What you do tend to have is what we term pre-match betting. So I'll use an example. You've got a Premier League game on Saturday, and you're able to bet on it until that game kicks off and that closes. So those are bets before a game even happens. Then you've got live in play betting. There's different terminology used for it. That is betting on an event that is live and ongoing. So that same game that's kicking off at 3 p.m. on Saturday, you will be able to bet on specific markets on that game. So for the next 10 minutes, what's going to happen? Goal scorers, the first half, etc. And it's more agile. It's obviously fast paced because it's live. So you're betting on an event while it's going on.
That's very interesting. Let's take a real life example here. So shout out to the Lakers. Let's say the Lakers were playing. So you mentioned that the first instance would be me maybe betting on the results with the odds, and that's it.
Right.
And then for live betting is as the game is happening, try to bet on certain things there. So with that being said, it sounds like there's a lot of live data that needs to be coming in at all times here. How do we do that? Maybe you can explain it to us from a technical perspective. How do we get this data into the system real time? How do we do this exactly?
I think from the front end side, because that's where I'm basically engineering most of it, is we use like application programming interfaces, which basically provide the front end with data. But there's so much like in terms of the engines behind, in terms of driving that to the front end, where you find that on the front end through the APIs, we'll basically be able to project data and display to the users as they bet, like instantly and basically real time. So we get feeds through things like WebSockets, which is basically like a messaging system, which basically tells the front end or tells the website to say, okay, there are updates from score from being 2-1 to like 3-1. Now the front end now would know basically that from there, display this, without having to refresh the page. Because in the old days, you'd find that users, for them to see updated web pages, they're basically required to refresh the pages. And like the things that were introduced like SPAs, which is single page applications, that basically bridge that gap. And but through WebSockets, we are able to basically get the data from the back end, which Zahid and team were working on, to display to the punters, and they are able to place bets there.
Okay, so let's take on the front end a little bit here. So based on the fact that it's real time, maybe people could be taking chances here. Like if I've got my app open, for instance, and I see Pirates score, basically the site needs to know immediately. Otherwise, I could place a bet on something that I've seen. Like You've mentioned WebSockets. What other technologies, what are the best ways to try to make sure that this reflects immediately?
Yeah, we're using we leverage from existing libraries on the front end side, which is Phoenix Channel. There's a framework which allows us to basically receive. We don't have to do much. There's in terms of the developer experience and productivity that is built into that library. So we basically leverage from that. And it just, all you need is just authentication and connection to the actual live feed, which is already open. The authentication allows us in terms of security as well to make sure that only our website and application basically has connection to the specified destination. So we're using that and leveraging from that, which gives us it's also, if ever there's a drop in connection, it queues up the actual request coming to the front end. Whenever the connection is revived, basically, it comes back to the way it should be onto the front end as well.
Cool, thanks for that, yeah. No, I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's clearly, it must be in tip-top shape and must work effectively for anything to work. So, Zaid, let's take a step back a little bit. Let's get away from the technology a bit. In terms of live in play and real-time betting versus casino or any other betting things, what's the market penetration in terms of people playing games? What's the penetration of people basically doing live betting?
Live betting, it's been around for a while, and it's definitely growing in popularity. So if you look back in the day before there was even online, you'd be sitting at a tote, watching a game, and somebody would be able to provide you odds and you'd be able to take those bets. And then it moved to an online state where you're at home. What I would say for live betting, the enjoyment from a customer satisfaction perspective is, whereas casino is algorithm based behind it and there's a chance of it, here you're calculated based on history as well. So you can go into an event with a specific favorite knowing their last 10 game histories. It's a lot more of a, for the lack of a better word, science applied to it. So it's down to those clients that enjoy that kind of satisfaction out of it. It's a bit thought-provoking. It's not just a kind of pick a number and let it go. There's thought in it, you're planned, you're working on data and you're working on history. So that uptake is definitely there, and it talks to that market in terms of onboarding. It's the individuals that enjoy the sporting side of it and are avid sports followers and say, hey, I can actually use my kind of history, knowledge on the sport, etc., to actually get some entertainment out of it. And so that's who it talks to. And it's definitely a growth. There's a growth in it from a user-based perspective. Unfortunately, I don't have figures on hand for you now. But I mean, if you want to look at the live in play offering that we've provided, we've been online through Hollywood for the last month or so. There's been over 400,000 live legs that's run through the system already. And that's not at a full user base. Yes. We're still kind of piloting and opening the floodgates slowly but surely. So there's definite growth. And it's growth over other integration style live offerings we have.
So as a delivery lead in the space, I guess you have to balance leadership, you have to balance technology. You probably also have to balance the customer and the betting culture. How do you balance these three things here?
It's an interesting one. Because as you know, they may have conflicting kind of ideas, So what the business may want may be technically not impossible. So always say nothing's impossible, but it's a lot of work, And then there's the kind of timeline delivery of them because of the nature of it. And, say you've got a big sporting event coming up in 2 weeks' time, and you've got to push out this really huge technical ask. How do you get it done? So it's my job to kind of keep all those chess pieces in play and, come to an agreement of what's technically possible and still satisfying a business need and a user need as well. So it is an interesting balancing act in my position.
Okay, I think let's dive maybe a bit deeper into the technical aspect of it. I think we spoke a little bit around the front end and the technologies needed there. From a back end perspective, getting this data now into the system and actually pushing it to the front end, what kind of architecture, what is the thinking, what is the way that this has to be done?
So I'd like to take the live in play offering and break it down into 3 very high level components for you, right? We have an events integration. So how sporting works is we have feed providers. So who will provide us all the event data, all the odds and the odds changing, etc. And that's an integration. So that's how we get that data into our system. So that's a back-end system. That's where Rodney's front-end team will kind of hook onto and kind of pull all of that event data as well, right? Then you've got the second back-end component is where you'll have your users actually placing bets. Once those markets close off for that event, their results, and then you know whether you won, you lost, etc. That's another portion of the engine, and then of course you've got the front end, right? So from an events integration perspective, you've got a load of data. So to put it into some figures, on a busy sporting day, you could be processing close to 60,000 messages that are coming in from your feed provider. So you can see the amount of data, the comms. Latency is a no-no. So from an architectural standpoint on how we integrate, it's a microservice event-driven architecture. So it made sense to utilize something like Kafka in between, stream it in and out, and you consume as you need. To put it into perspective, how live works, so from a feed provider, they have actual scouts at a field that are capturing as the event is going. That aggregates into a payload. Obviously, they have systems on their end, and they push that into us. We ingest that, make sense of that info, and pass it along. That entire process from a scout to you as a user is within a second, to give you the idea on how fast it needs to happen, because it is live. So there is large volume. So going back to kind of the architecture and the tech setup, microservice event-driven, one great thing that's worked really well from a performance standpoint is we're a containerized complete backend. So we have all of our applications that are containerized, they're orchestrated, so they're hosted on OpenShift. So it makes life a lot easier to work with workloads as it increases and decreases, because you'll have busy periods and quieter periods. So that definitely serves us well. Another important architectural point within our system is a distributed database technology. So you don't have a monolith kind of server that's slowing you down. It's distributed, also containerized, low latency, so that comms go really quickly back and forth between your database, your service and API layer, and down to the front end.
Okay, I think maybe let's just dive a little bit deeper in there. You mentioned OpenShift, you mentioned containerization there. When making a decision for some of these things, because it's a high volume, high data environment, the decision whether to go public or private cloud, what informs that decision?
So there's a good question. There's multiple factors to take into consideration when it comes to on-prem, private cloud or public cloud. I think one of the big things is security as well, because of the amount of data that you're working with. I'm not saying that a public cloud is insecure or a private cloud is insecure, but you got to take that into consideration. You have to take into consideration costing. So is it a pay per use, or does it make sense for you to have a on-prem private cloud that you're setting up? So with those factors in place, we already had an on-premise kind of data center that we've been utilizing in 3 separate locations, because one of the other big things is you need redundancy. You can't have a single point of failure. You need to have failovers. You need to have the ability that if something does go wrong, it doesn't take you down completely. And so we already had an on-prem private cloud setup, which we utilized for it, and it's been serving us well over the period, yeah.
I think maybe because you mentioned fault tolerance there, from a development perspective, when developing this kind of system, it also has you have to be thinking of it like in that sense there with fault tolerance. What are some of the practices that you follow to try to make sure you ensure that even in disaster situations we have minimal damage?
Yeah, I think from the development perspective, we basically part of the development team of an exciting group of individuals, and also we basically follow processes, And we try to stick to standards in terms of technology, but we have all our own culture within the company. So we basically prioritize things like security, which Zahid has touched on as well. Because at the end of the day, we're in a fast-paced environment, but also it's financial. So a person might be losing money, it might be turning into a big thing. So you want to basically make sure that all the fundamentals are done within the front end. We don't treat it like separate to any other feature or project that we've worked on at BET, but we try to basically stick to those standards because those are the best. So we make sure that when we integrate, we follow those standards as well within the front end. So, but we prioritize, from the front end perspective, we always look at the user experience as the main thing as well, because you don't want to frustrate your punters, like clicking a button that is not responsive, and then they basically move to the competitor. You need to make sure that even though there's so much heavy lifting that is happening on the back end, but the front end as well is seamless in terms of the user experience.
Okay, you mentioned a punter. Just for on the jargon there, a punter is basically somebody playing.
Yes,
okay.
100%. It's a user.
It's a user, basically.
Yeah.
So in terms of now, you've got a team there. You mentioned culture in there. What kind of person, what kind of mindset does a developer need to have to actually be in this space, like developing for a real-time system with everything that you need to consider, like latency, security? What kind of mindset does one need to have?
I think it's more of a growth mindset, basically, being open to new perspective, new ideas, because sometimes you might be used to this way of doing things, and then maybe because of the demand of the project, like LIP, there's so many dynamics that are happening there. Real-time data is before, because we're coming from pre-match. Now, real-time data needs to be instant and everything. You need to think about the fall overs and so forth. Even from the front-end perspective, what if the connection is lost? How do you manage data in that front? Because if the socket connection is lost, currently what we do, we basically use the API as the fall over. But whenever it's basically reconnected and revived, then we basically connect again. So that's why we leverage from the libraries that are out there. Make sure that you're up to date with the actual trends as well on the front end side, because there are libraries that are basically going out, and also you need to make sure that also with regards to security, that is taken care of as well. You don't want issues with data and people's information leaking out,
Nah, got it. Yeah, definitely sounds like you do need to have a growth mindset there, where you're constantly learning, constantly having to improve. Speaking of constantly, it's live. It always has to be on. Now, from a delivery lead perspective, how do you balance your life now, from a work perspective and a personal life, and something is down, you have to get called? How do you manage all of this?
So it comes with the territory. Obviously, the way you do it is you want to be proactive rather than reactive. So when this project was in its infancy, planning and designing the most optimal solution that it'll have a 99.9% uptime, so you don't have those issues, is what you strive for. And I mean, kudos to the teams involved. That's how they've worked. So for the majority of the time, we've had this thing purring on and processing and working. Obviously, there are teething issues when you take anything this big out, and there have been really good lessons learned. So what that means is, you're just always got your finger to the pulse, or finger on the pulse rather, to pay attention to any big changes or tweaks that you've been doing. Monitoring is important. Data that you get, watching those trends, watching the performance, and keep fine-tuning it till you get to that point. The balancing of personal life and work as well, especially in a live environment. As I say, I have a very understanding family that knows that, at any time something may happen that we kind of need you on board, and we're going to have to just leave what you're doing, And as I said, it comes with the territory. But definitely, in the time that it's been around for about a month and a half, we've been relatively good. We've had a couple of teething issues, and then obviously clean up thereafter. But great lessons learned and how to improve. Yeah,
that's amazing. And then on your side, something similar here is when trying to recruit for somebody, for a team that's focused on live betting. You mentioned Kafka, I think you mentioned containerization, you mentioned OpenShift. What other skills would you be looking for something like this?
So from a development standpoint, the back-end teams are exactly that. You know, we work very server-side, API service. So I would firstly look for a developer that enjoys that. You know, that's their game. It's more on the kind of deep diving into system-to-system communication. You know, so having an enjoyment for it. From a technologies perspective, microservice architecture is definitely helpful, and that comes with event-driven. So Kafka, you know, doesn't necessarily have to be Kafka itself. I mean, we look at people who've worked with rabbits, etc. You know, similar foundational concepts. And then from a thought perspective, it's an out-of-the-box thinker, because that's what you always have. It's somebody that's going to look at a problem and come up with a solution that nobody else within the team would have thought of, but that's elegant and simple at the same time. You know, and that's very agnostic of technical abilities. That's just the way somebody problem solves. So a problem solver, definitely.
Okay. Definitely. So I think for both of you on this one here, like now you've gone through the journey here. From a back end and from a leadership perspective from yourself there, Zahid, what are the three must-dos, like the lessons that you've learned that you wish that you knew before you went into this?
So I think when it comes to just betting in general, and you can use this across the board for live or pre-match, things that you have to take into consideration for live specifically is, because it's an event that's unfolding, the excitement comes out of, obviously, odds changes, right? So that's where, how can I, as an end user, profit out of it, you know, from playing a game? How can I make the most amount of money? And that's where the odds come into play. And those are forever changing because it's live as a game is going on. What you want to do is, as a provider, you still want to be responsible in terms of making sure that you're tracking and providing a responsible gaming experience for your end user. That definitely you have to do. Because you are going to end up in a situation where somebody is ending down a trail that they shouldn't be, you know, from a sports betting perspective. I think that's a massive one. I think the second one that you always have to be mindful of is you can't create a situation that's a low latency intentionally such that it can be gamified. Because that's what can happen. I mean, fraud is a thing, not just in SA, globally. And people will find ingenuitive ways to kind of fraud a system, you know. And if you pay attention and follow a lot of the sports betting kind of articles and blogs, a big one is match fixing, because that's what live is really open up into. You know, you can end up in a situation with that. So you want to protect yourself, right? So that's one of the big do's. And alongside that, maybe the third one for me would be is obviously providing markets that are legislated and can't be gamified. So I'll take an example, football game again. You don't want to provide a market about a throw-in, for example, you know, because that can be gamified, you know. So it's having that legislative responsibilities and making sure that you're developing with that in mind. What are the legislations from a gaming perspective that we need to be cognizant of?
That last example that you just made, actually, in terms of the markets for live in play, is very interesting. How do you come to the decisions of what can be bet on? Because there is a lot of the free kicks are normally there, corner kicks are there. How do you look at it that a throw-in can be gamified versus, let's say, a free kick, for instance?
A throw-in for me, I think, is, using that example, you can gamify it a lot easier in terms of if you have all the players, like, excuse my pun, on board. To get a throw-in going, it's very easy to do, as opposed to a free kick, which needs to be a foul, that needs to be placed in a certain way. You understand what I'm trying to say? Then the responsibility on how we ingest that data is your feed providers. You want to have a premium service provider that you know is on board doing things by the book on how they're bringing that data in, the leagues that they're providing, etc. And the games that they're providing aren't dodgy as well. So I think that's an important one. And we've done a lot of homework on who we bring on board for our live feeds, because you can go from premium to all the way down to people that are scraping the web, for this data and providing it off. You want to kind of stay away from those things. Yeah.
Got it. And then on your side, in terms of from a technology front-end perspective, what were the biggest lessons and the three things that you wish you knew before you got started?
Yeah, I think I got to understand the actual, because before then, we worked mainly, my focus was on the things like verification on our platform. But with the actual live and play, it taught me in terms of the sports part of it, as much as I'm a soccer fan as well. But it talks more to the actual sports betting and everything, understanding, because it brought me closer to the back-end team as well, where I understood now how does data flow from the provider to us and then from us to the front end and so forth. So the learnings is basically understanding when and how to basically prioritize the end user, because at the end of the day, we develop for the end users. That's how we get the money and everything, people betting and so forth. So you wanna basically make sure that their experience is the best as possible. Especially we competing with so many other competitors out there. You're competing against other applications as well. So you don't want people frustrated when you're trying to navigate on your system and so forth. And also in terms of with that, you need to understand that you're not developing for you as a business owner or a product owner or a developer. You're developing for someone else. You need to put yourself in their shoes first before you even start doing anything. So you need to basically make sure that your architecture, your infrastructure is very intact for those end users at the end of the day. So those are the learnings and also just the experience as well, for the team. It's it brings you more to the actual team members understanding the team, understanding the actual business needs as well in the process. So yeah, for me, I think it's basically user experience. The last one is the performance. You need to always think about performance because live and play is all about performance. So if I'm in an application like Premium in this case, I'm not basically, if I see the odds are taking long to update, it might be frustrating as well. People might be moving to another, platform as well. So you need to make sure that in terms of the performance, as Zahid said earlier, during launch and soft launch, we basically encountered teething issues. But the way we had built the system, it was very intact. It was easy to maneuver around those issues that we had initially. And now we're looking at a system that is basically a very solid in terms of foundation. The minimal issues that we've had, it's only enhancement now that we're dealing with mostly. So yeah.
Okay, so I heard Rodney mention customers again. He mentioned user experience. So how do we go about getting the feedback from the punters in terms of continually trying to improve the product?
So there definitely is mechanisms for end users to provide feedback on an experience, right? And then we go back to data aggregation. So it can be a marketing tool, for example, where you reach out and say, hey, cool, you've worked with or you've played X, Y, and Z. What is your experience? A rating, so on and so forth. We also look at what is out there in terms of features, because you have to be competitive. At the end of the day, the betting market in SA has been changed in the last few years, and you'll see a lot of these online betting houses pop up. And Hollywood's been around for a while. Their legacy, and you want to obviously be first to market. You want to be on top of features that you can provide. So doing competitor analysis is super important as well. What can we provide that will give us the edge over the next? And then definitely getting end user feedback, it's getting business feedback. So very early on in those stages, we involve business in our process to ensure that they are giving us that positive or negative feedback on what we need to fix. Yes. And that was really important, to do before we started rolling this out.
Okay. So in closing, what do you think is the future of live betting?
So for me, it's obviously just the offerings that we provide. So we've been talking about soccer a lot, and you mentioned basketball.
Hey,
There's
swish.
a lot of sports.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sports out there. And the live offering currently does have quite a few, your tennis, your cricket, etc. For the future, it's growing that portfolio, down to maybe some very niche sports that are out there. Who knows? There may be darts leagues, for example, that you can bet on live. I'm just saying. And then it's expanding those into what you can bet on for those events. Creating more of those opportunities and chances for people to get into the door. Over and above that, from a feature set perspective, it would be like Rodney and them have been working, is providing a live stream of that game, while it's ongoing. So you're there, you're in one single place, you're on our premium website, you've got the game going on the side, and you can bet on it instead of you sitting and kind of watching it on a TV that may have latency depending, or whatever the case may be, And who knows from there what else we offer, know.
That is very interesting. I think there's still so much that can be done here. Like you mentioned, they're watching the game, the licensing implications, and things like that. But I think that is a wrap for us for today. I thank you, Zaid. Thank you, Rodney, for all your insights relating to live betting. If you enjoyed the episode, please do make sure to comment, to share, and also check out our previous episodes of the Coding Culture podcast. Remember, stay curious and keep innovating.